will receive a pop-up on your screen. Please accept yes if you're comfortable. If not, please feel free to exit. This will be recorded. So I want to start off by saying good afternoon and thank you for attending the Lunch and Learn series hosted by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, the North Carolina Office of Strategic Partnerships, and VolunteerNC. Today's program will be recorded and available on the VolunteerNC YouTube channel. The webinar link, as well as any materials provided by today's speaker, will be emailed to you by tomorrow afternoon, along with a survey and a link to register for our next program. Please complete the VolunteerNC Lunch and Learn survey. Your responses will enable us to continue providing programming relevant to your organization. Put your questions in the chat box and our moderator, Colleen Garrett, will read them out. Today's guest speaker, Mike Sweeney, will present today's topic, training staff to lead and manage volunteers. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Mike Sweeney is the Program Director for Nonprofit Services at the Triangle Nonprofit and Volunteer Leadership Center, where as a volunteer, he leads planning, development, and delivery of training programs for nonprofits. Mike often delivers service enterprise training and monthly nonprofit training sessions. He has over 25 years engineering personnel management experience and over 15 years volunteer experience, including leadership and training positions. Thank you so much, Mike, for being our guest speaker on today's topic.
Thank you, Daphne, and welcome everyone. We have a very busy afternoon and lots of good stuff to cover with you this afternoon. So thank you for joining. We'll be using some polls throughout the presentation. So there may be a point in time where you have to eat with one hand and hit some keys with the other. So stay tuned for that. Also, if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat and I'll stop periodically and we'll take time for some of those. So let's get going. Let's talk about training staff to lead and manage volunteers. Here's the outline of what we're going to cover today. We'll talk about importance, communication. We'll talk about some volunteer leadership and management best practices that you can take with you. A good portion of what we talk about will be some ideas, techniques that you can take with you today and apply at your nonprofit. We'll talk about one of those fun items like working with problem volunteers, which you'll all get a chance to do sooner or later. And we'll also talk about recognition. Okay, let me run a couple of definitions by you before we get started. First of all, there is a difference between a leader and a manager. A leader is someone who is focused on more strategic thinking. In other words, the outside person has an outside view and a future view of your nonprofit. A manager has more of a tactical or short-term position, and the manager is a person who is responsible for results. Supervisor typically is like a manager with maybe a little less responsibility. These terms are often used interchangeably. Truly, they're not. I'll probably use them interchangeably today in a couple of conversations, but just to make you aware, organizations need leaders and they need managers. So in a nonprofit, you might find yourself wearing one of several of these hats, depending on the role and the situation you're faced with. But remember, if you don't know where you're going and why, you're not going to get there. This is leadership. If you don't have a plan, the necessary tools, the staff, and measurement, you're not going to get there either. This is management. Okay, why is this important? Why is it important to provide good management to staff and volunteers in your organization? We're going to start this with a poll. So the first question for you, and Colleen is going to put this up for you. Think of a negative volunteer or work experience that you've had, and then to what extent did your supervisor, manager, or leader contribute to the experience's negative quality? So if you would vote on question number one, think of a negative volunteer or work experience, and to what extent did your supervisor, manager, or leader contribute to the experience's negative quality? Okay, we have some votes coming in. Okay, let's collect a few more. Still voting, still voting. Okay, I think it's stabilized. Colleen, let's share the results. Okay. And here are the results. You'll see the answer to this question from your viewpoint significantly is the major answer for a negative work experience that you may have had in your past. A good number of some, but some and significantly are the biggies. So let's stop sharing that one. And we're going to move along. Okay, poll number 2. Poll number 2, think of a really great volunteer or work experience that you've had, and to what extent did your supervisor help make the experience positive? So let's vote on number 2. Okay. Okay, I get a couple more votes going here. All right. Okay, let's share the results on this one. Number 2, again, significantly is quite large here, but you'll see totally show up more and some showing up. So very typical of results that we get on this poll, that your supervisor, your manager, leadership provides a big difference in both positive and negative experiences in your background. So here's a statistic you've probably heard before, but it's still quite valid. 80% of employees who quit their jobs do it because of their manager. This is out in industry. 80% of employees who quit their jobs do it because of their manager. Now, what happens in nonprofit land? Well, there's a study done by the UPS Foundation, and they found that 40% of people left their volunteer positions because they did not feel the organization managed volunteers well. Now that's a big number. You know that volunteers leave organizations for many reasons, either other opportunities, a change in situation, a change in employment, and often volunteers will transition more often than employees working for an organization. So that 40% number is big, right? And also, if we look at that study, 52% of these folks said they would be likely to volunteer for an organization that has a reputation for being well managed. So in terms of the importance, leadership and management set the tone for the organization, and that's you. Let me pause before we move. Colleen, any questions in the chat?
Not at this time, Mike.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the most important item we're going to discuss today. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communications is the number one item that nonprofits and businesses alike need to focus on. Why? Well, here's a study that was done a few years ago. This is an industry study in 2011. It's an industry study showed that $37 billion was the total estimated cost of employee misunderstanding, including actions or errors of omission by employees who have misunderstood or were misinformed about company policies, business processes, job function, or a combination of the three. This survey is 100,000 employee companies. It's among 400 survey corporations in the US and UK. So there's a big data population where this survey was taken. The other point to note, the average cost per company in this survey was $62.4 million per year. Total 37 billion, average cost per company, $62.4 million a year. And looking at this differently, a little over $26,000 is the cumulative cost per worker per year due to productivity loss resulting from communication barriers. Okay, so it's not just industry. We see this, of course, in nonprofits as well. Big impact for not having a good communications process and a good communications environment. So we're going to talk about that next. Volunteers need and deserve clarity on their responsibilities and functions toward the agency and its clients, such as when are the volunteer hours, what job is to be done, how it's supposed to be done. Also, significant agency policies, procedures, and operations that affect them or that they affect, such as client confidentiality, procedures for closing the building, safety, and that sort of thing. The agency has responsibilities toward the volunteers as well, and that includes training, transportation, meals, leadership, management, supervision, and that sort of thing. So communicating the basics, very important. Now let's look at from a different perspective, from perspective of your organization's culture. How does communication play into that? Well, recall your culture is what people do, what people say, and what people believe. One more time, culture is what people do, what people say, and what people believe. So let's look at some methods of communication for orienting and communicating with volunteers. So first of all, you want your volunteers to know about your agency's vision, mission, and value statement. You want to provide an orientation or a training session for new people coming in. A good way to do that is through job sharing, or what we call a buddy system, where you pair a volunteer with someone who's familiar with the position to give them someone both to train them and to be able to ask questions and that sort of thing. Some folks use training videos and then follow that up with a Q&A session. Different ways of orienting and bringing your volunteers on board. An important point, after a volunteer's first day, have a follow-up discussion. Find out how that first day went, because you want them to come back the second day. Very important to have that as part of your communication structure. Have that discussion at the end of the first day. Also have well-written volunteer position descriptions in place. This will come up several times in this discussion this afternoon. And also have develop and update a volunteer handbook. So the volunteer has some place to go to get some questions answered, and you have a place to document and define different policies that your nonprofit has. And we'll see how that plays in a little bit later. Also, periodically hold and give and take feedback sessions. In other words, volunteers want to know, like any employee wants to know, how am I doing? What are the things I'm doing well? And what are some things I could do better at? And also the other way around, volunteers are working right at the working level with your clients and making things happen in your organization. And based on the experience they may bring, they may have some very good ideas for you. Ways that you might be able to run your operation a little bit better or a little differently. So this is a give and take session. Make sure that you provide them feedback on their work, and also provide feedback sessions so they can give you some ideas that'll help you run a little smoother. Now for these items, an important point is make sure someone, doesn't necessarily have to be you, but someone in your organization talks to the volunteers about all of these. So you get a good communication process started with your volunteers and continues throughout the period that they're working with you. Another important point is engagement. Engagement. This is communicating with your volunteers and staff to engage them. So again, both volunteers and staff, you want to show them your mission, your vision, and your culture and make them part of it. This is what we mean by engagement. Culture is what we see, what we hear, and what we believe. So show them the outcomes of their work. Show them how their work makes a real difference in the community. And also share successes and results. Not everyone sees all of the successes and results of your nonprofit generates. People are working in different parts of the organization, and based on their assignments, they may not see how their contribution is making a difference in the community. And as we know, all volunteers want to make a difference. And that's something that you can help with by showing them that, yes, the work that you're doing is helping in this area and this area to make their experience with you even more valuable to them. So share what's going on often. If you have new staff members coming in, do you have some new clients? Did we receive a large donation? People want to know what's happening. So show what's going on to your staff and your volunteers. And we talked about providing and requesting feedback and ideas, right? This is a good bi-directional way to help you run. One direction being providing feedback, the other direction receiving some feedback. Then recognition and appreciation. This is how volunteers get paid, right? No paycheck coming in here, but volunteers get their satisfaction from recognition and also appreciation and knowing they're making a difference for your clients. Okay. Let's talk about some best practices. These are items that you can take, especially the ones on this first chart. These are items that you can take and use today. Okay, number one, welcome a new volunteer into your agency like you would welcome a visitor into your home. Very simple concept. Make the volunteer feel welcome, like he or she was coming into your home. Introduce them to the people there. Show them where the kitchen is. Show them where they hang their coats. Show them where the restroom is. Show them where the lunchroom is. Get around to meet everyone and find out what's where. So, take time to pretend they're coming into your home for the first time. Realize they've never been there before, and show them around. Make them feel comfortable. Big one, number two, and a lot of executive directors have problems with this one. Treat volunteers as unpaid staff, right? They're professional, they're working, they're unpaid staff. Set clear expectations. That's through meaningful job descriptions. Define what you want them to do clearly, provide it in documentation, and also in there indicate who they should talk to if they have questions. Approach volunteers with the correct leadership behavior based on their readiness. We're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes in more detail. This involves you perhaps adjusting your style a bit, and we'll get into that. Management by walking around is a big one. Take time to go through your organization, speak to folks, see what's going on. Don't just stay in your office. Get out there and make yourself visible. Very important concept in leadership. And as people are working with you, volunteers and staff as well, right? Greet them every day. Say hello, say goodbye, but just show them that you appreciate them being there. We talked about reviews and feedback, and also recognition and appreciation. These are all things you can do. As I mentioned at the top of the slide, no training required. These are some best practices that you can implement right now and build a strong culture for your staff and volunteers and help you better manage volunteers, whether it be by staff or by other volunteers. Just good, solid concepts and techniques you can use today. Okay, let's get a little deeper. This is a concept that's simple. The chart is complicated. So, and this is called situational leadership, and there are week-long courses that cover situational leadership, but I'm going to give you a 10-minute version of this, but I'll give you enough of it such that you can take this and use it right away. Okay, so let's take a look at this chart. Over on the left-hand side, I'm going to follow the river on the chart, the little wavy line as we go through the different states. And what I mean by states, there are three kinds of leadership behavior that I'm going to discuss. And then we'll look at, four kinds of leadership behavior, and then 4 levels of follower readiness. So this is the leadership behavior we're talking about first. And these apply in different situations, and we'll talk about that as we go through. Now let's start in the lower left-hand corner. This is known as the telling state. This is where you provide specific instructions to your follower. In other words, step 1 is this, do this, do this. Step 2, do this, and possibly bring each step back for me to review. Very specific. So primarily for someone new in your organization, not familiar with what you're doing, not familiar with the organization or really becoming oriented. So you want to give folks like that very specific instructions because it's all new to them, right? So you want to tell them, okay, do this, let them build some confidence by completing the specific tasks that you give them. So if we look at the arrows and things around the graph, in this telling state, there's a lot of involvement with you in the task. As the leader, you're going to be involved in specifying the steps they should be taking. So you're going to have a high involvement in the task, which the red arrow shows on the bottom. The left-hand side of the red arrow is high task involvement. And then looking at the blue arrow on the left side, this is the low relationship quadrant, basically showing that you're not really building a relationship here. You're primarily focused on the task, less give and take. Okay, let's move up one. Let's go up to the S2 category, which is the selling quadrant. And what that means is you take time to explain why you're doing the steps. Okay, we're doing this, and this is why we're doing it. So you have a lot more interaction with the follower, and you're being more specific about what's going on, why they're doing particular steps. Now, someone coming in new don't necessarily want to start there because it's like hitting them with a fire hose. Not only do they have specific tasks to do, but now you're getting into more detail about why this is happening and why that's happening. So this is more once folks start rolling into the process. So as we move forward now, okay, we've been involved pretty heavily in the task with S1 and S2. Now, if we move to S3, this is where we share ideas and work together in terms of making decisions. It's called the participating state. And in this case, you'll be working with your follower as a leader. You'll be working with your follower and sharing the decision making. Okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? What do you think the schedule looks like? A lot of give and take here, right? So you'll have a lot of relationship work here in terms of talking back and forth, sharing some ideas, coming up with a plan, but still the follower is going to be responsible for executing it. So you're not going to be involved in the task quite so much, but you work together on how to do it. And then state 4, which is the empowering state. This is where you basically turn over the decision-making and the implementation to your follower. In other words, they know what they're doing. They've done it before. Here, take this, go do it. Let me know, when you're done, right? The empowering state, your follower is comfortable, has the skills, has the desire, let them go. These are people who don't need to be micromanaged. So you use the empowering state to give them the power to go make it happen. Now, we talked about the leadership side of this. Now let's look at the follower side of this. There are also 4 states here on the follower side. R1 for follower readiness, R1 is somebody totally new, okay? They don't understand the process, they're new to the organization, may or may not have the skills, brand new. So you're just breaking these folks in, okay? And then if you go up to R2, they know a little bit more about what's going on. So they're not ready to take it on by themselves yet, and may not have all the skills they need, but they have an idea of what's going on. So they're ready to jump in and help. R3, not quite ready yet, right? We don't have quite enough experience, right? Still need some guidance, but very willing, very able to take on the task. Now, our 4, ready, willing, and able, trained, familiar, ready to go, can handle the task and fully own it. So we have 4 states of leadership and then 4 states of readiness. So guess what? Your job as a manager or leader is to match them up. You may have a preference, and we all have preferences. You may like to work in the S3 state, the participating state, where you are working together to come up with a plan and a schedule. You may be an S1 person where you like to be very specific. Do this, do this, do this, do it my way, this, and this. Or you may be an empowering S4, here, go do this. So what you have to watch out for as a leader or manager is to make sure you're matching your leadership style with the follower residents. So if, for instance, if you're a telling person, maybe you have to act in the participating state to work with a volunteer who's more experienced. Same thing, if you're an S4 person, you may need to back up and use one of the other states that has more discussion, more description, more direction, if you're working with a person who is unfamiliar or new with the tasks. So to help you understand what I just talked about and to make sure that you're with me on this, have a couple of polls coming up. So Colleen, if you would give me number 1, please. This is poll number 3. So in this particular example, this is Jim's first day volunteering at a farm. He's never worked at a farm before. He thinks eggs come from the grocery store. His supervisor hands him a basket and tells him to go gather some eggs from the chickens. End of the day, Jim is totally frustrated. So what's happening here? Question number 1, which leadership style is the supervisor using? Remember S1, S2, S3, S4, right? Being the telling, selling, participating. So I got participating on there twice. The last one is empowerment. My mistake. But anyway, look at the states 1, 2, 3, 4. And the second one, what is Jim's readiness level? What is Jim ready to take on? And then number 3, after that experience, what is Jim likely to do the next day? Okay, let's get some voting going here. Just scroll down to get them all. We're getting some votes rolling in here now. Keep them coming. Okay. I think all the votes are in. I've got a couple more coming. I'll just give it another minute or so. Okay, let's take a look. Well, the first question, I put the word tell in the description, which tricked you. Okay. But keep in mind, in this case, Jim has never been to the farm, never worked on the farm, thinks eggs come to a grocery store. So he's a newbie, right? And instead of explaining how to gather eggs, where to gather eggs, what chickens look like, the supervisor just handed him a basket and said, go do it, right? So really, the supervisor was using the empowering state 4 to just go do it. And so at the end of the day, Jim was frustrated because he really didn't know what to do. So what's Jim's readiness level? Yeah, you could make the argument for the second one, but in the second question, oops, I need to share the results, sorry. There we go. Okay, for that first one, is really the last choice, the empowerment state. Okay, so let's go to question 2. Yes, Jim's a newbie. I would call him an S1, but I could argue that S2 might be okay because he is new. He could be. You can tell him, has some discussion on why you're doing what you're doing, but really needs some basics on how to gather eggs. So good catch on that one. So the next one. Yeah, what's Jim going to do the next day? Most likely he's going to find somewhere else to volunteer. I mean, he was frustrated at the end of the first day. The supervisor didn't really help him get in there and give him the basics. And I'm glad there's at least one person who is snarky as I am, who selected throw eggs at the supervisor. Very good. Okay, let's stop sharing that one. Let's go to another one. Come on, okay. Now in this case, Betty is a volunteer at a nonprofit as their social media marketing manager, and she's responsible for advertising. This is something Betty's performed this role for a Fortune 500 company for 10 years and is known for her creativity and artistic talent. Her new supervisor gives her a single web page to design, specifies the colors, the fonts, the graphics, and that she must use, and then insists on a review of each step. Okay. So in this case, for Betty, which leadership style is that new supervisor using? What's Betty's readiness level? Which leadership style would be more appropriate for the supervisor to use in this case? And what is Betty most likely to do the next day? So let's go vote on poll number 4, I'm sorry. Okay, let's see some voting here. See a couple coming here, some more. Okay. Okay. Let's get a couple more votes here. We're coming in. Get a couple more. Okay, I think we've got them. Let's wrap it up. Take a look. All right. Which leadership style is the supervisor using? Telling. Exactly. Exactly. The supervisor is being very specific, very detailed, and wants Betty to review each step along the way. So that's what she sees from her new supervisor. Betty's readiness level. Yes, ready, willing, and able. Betty's an expert at this. Most likely knows more about it than her supervisor. So she's ready to rock and roll. And there are a couple of folks who said not ready, but willing and able, meaning the state 3. Yeah, okay, maybe we do a little discussion back and forth here, as opposed, especially a new manager, would tend to work in that area and kind of work together initially rather than just let her go. So next, perfect answers here on question number 3. What leadership style would be more appropriate? Yes, either participating or empowering. And depending upon maybe a case where the supervisor and Betty are trying to get to know each other a little bit, so participating would be appropriate. Or the supervisor recognizes, hey, Betty knows how to do this. Let me just, let her do her thing and go do it. So yeah, participating or empowering would be the answers there. Now, what's Betty most likely to do the next day? Possibly find somewhere else to volunteer, show her completed work to her supervisor, and ask for a more challenging assignment, and possibly maybe a little more be a little more direct. But I think the answer number 2 is probably most likely, showing her completed work to the supervisor and asking. And number 1 is very likely. I mean, Betty just may have enough of this and say, I'm highly experienced at this. There are lots of other nonprofits who can use me. I'll go find someone else somewhere else to volunteer if that's the way they're going to approach me here. And I see no one provided the snarky answer of paint or supervisor several different colors. Okay, very good. I think you got the idea. And again, this is something that you can take back and use right now, right? Think of your style, think of the people that you're working with, and you may have to adjust your style to reflect their readiness and to be in a better position to work comfortably with them. Okay. Management by walking around. This is a very simple but very powerful concept. I once knew an executive, a corporate executive, whose office was in headquarters, and periodically she would go out to the different plants in the country to find out what was going on and get an understanding of what their problems and issues were and how their progress was coming along. Ordinarily, when that happens, when you hear the executive from headquarters is coming to visit the plant today, then all the managers and leaders go in and put their charts together with nice graphs and pull in lots of data and build a nice story to show the executive when that person arrives. Well, this person was a little different. She came in and she went to the factory and talked to the people who are building the product, talked to the engineers who are designing the product, talked to the quality engineering group to see, okay, how are we doing here? What's the quality of the product we're putting out? Talk to the customer support people. What do the customers think of what we have here? And then she would go to the meeting. So if they tried to snow her with some fancy charts and fancy graphs, nah, she didn't buy it. So she got a really good impression of what was happening at the place she was visiting by walking around and talking to folks. But that's kind of at the working level, you can do the same thing, right? Here's a chance to go out and use some active listening, talk to folks and find out what their perspective is. Chance to provide and deliver some feedback, chance to provide a solution to a problem before it becomes a big problem. And also reduce some frustration. You can see someone struggling with a particular part of the operation and say, well, maybe we can find you a tool, or maybe we can find you some help to make that frustration go away. So you're taking a frustrated volunteer and turning them into a happy volunteer. And that's the whole idea. You want happy campers on your team. As I'll say several times during this session, happy volunteers and happy staff members are your best ambassadors. Another management by walking around, interpersonal problems you can pick up pretty easily and resolve it. An example in the real world, Joe Torre, who used to manage the New York Yankees a few years ago, always used to say if he noticed something that was going on in the clubhouse, he would get it flattened right away. And rather than let it kind of fester with the team and get ugly later on. But important, if you see a problem, the quicker you can solve it, the better. Also, as I mentioned, removing roadblocks. You'll see if there's a choke point in what you're doing, or a roadblock of something that's preventing your work from getting done. Good chance to see that by walking around. Also, we talked about greeting and recognizing people on a daily basis. You do this when you're taking time to take a trip through your organization, through your office, or whatever your environment is, to observe and also gather while you're out there. So very powerful concept, very simple. And a lot of people don't take time to do this. It doesn't take long, but it pays big dividends in terms of getting problems early and removing roadblocks for your volunteers. Here's another concept that I particularly like. One of the management books that I really like is called First Break All the Rules. And the reference is on this slide. A couple of points from this book. Looking at manager roles, and according to this, right, most important responsibilities when you're selecting a person to be part of your team, whether it's a staff member or a volunteer, you want to select for talent, not necessarily experience, intelligence, or determination. You want to select for talent because the others can be learned. Select for talent, hire, select and hire for talent, then train for skills. Set expectations, right? What are the outcomes that you want? Not necessarily the right steps, but what are the outcomes that you want from the assignment? In terms of motivating the person, focus on their strengths, not their weaknesses. Focus on their strengths and grow their strengths. In terms of development, which you'll all be doing as managers and leaders, find the right fit for a person, which may be not necessarily the next rung on the ladder. I've seen cases where people who are very good, shall we say, technical or professional contributors to the organization, not in a management role, but very strong in their contribution level, but the next rung on the ladder is a management position. And what you end up happening is you lose a good technical staff person and you gain a poor manager. So be very careful here in terms of finding the right match for people as they grow in their interests. Okay, let's see if there are any questions, Colleen, in the chat.
I don't see any yet, Mike.
Okay. All right, this next one is always fun. Problem volunteers. As a leader, you are going to run into this. As a leader or manager, you're going to run into this sooner or later. So best idea is to get prepared. So when it happens, you can handle it in the very best possible way. So I'm going to talk about two types of problem volunteers. The first type, what I call is a performance situation. This is a case where the person can't complete the assignment they're given. Can be for a number of reasons, which is the first thing you want to find out. Have a little private conversation, ask some questions, and see if there's an underlying problem. If this is something they've been doing for a long time, well, maybe there's something going on at home or something else that's kind of underneath that they may need to solve to be able to complete the task that you're giving them. So you know how much slack to give them that way and understand where they're coming from. So there may be some background that you need to find out about. Sometimes you may need to use the situational leadership model in reverse. Okay, someone who maybe is in the you're using the R4 or their R4, you're using the S4 state, the empowerment state to work with. Well, maybe you need to call them back a little bit and have some interaction into the kind of the S3 where you're going back and forth with ideas and sharing ideas to get them back up to the level where they can take the project and go with it. Maybe you have to take them back a little further in terms of where you're giving them a little more direction. That's what I mean by working the situational leadership model in reverse. Might find they need some additional training or maybe some shadowing or someone who's doing a similar task that can help them do better and achieve what you need to happen with the task that you've given them. Maybe a case where it's not that great a match and you need to find another match in your organization for them. Find them a different task that they can achieve at and also get the reward from their experience. Some cases you may find folks just don't work. Either they don't have the skills or just can't perform at the task you give them, which is frustrating for them and for you. So here's where you try to find another placement for them, if not in your organization, maybe in another. Important part about all of these problem volunteer situations: document, document, document. Remember I said communicate, communicate, communicate before? Well, this is document, document, document. When you have that discussion, while it's fresh in your mind, write it down because it may come back to revisit you again. Okay, the other type of problem volunteer is the behavior problem. This one is tougher, but it's also important that you fix these problems. And because if you don't, it could cause your staff and your volunteers to leave, which will destroy your capacity. So behavior problems are really tougher to deal with, but you use some of the same steps. As I say, set yourself up for success. Here's where the communication comes in. Make sure you have clear job requirements and make sure that you have professional and respectful behavior in your list of requirements for the job. So they know what the expectations are, and then you have something to fall back on to show them, hey, look, you're not doing this, and this is in the job description. I'm going to send you a handout that's called Redirecting Volunteer Behavior that will give you a step-by-step process to work in these situations in terms of what to ask about and where to document and follow through to get the problem resolved. It's important in both the behavior and the performance that when you get the problem identified, you want the person with the problem, in this case, it would be the volunteer, to own the problem, understand there is a problem, and then own the solution, not just give it to you and have you fix it for them. They need to own it. They need to fix it and to get back where they need to be in terms of their role and their responsibilities. Once again, document, document, document. And as I say at the bottom of this chart, for your sake and the sake of your volunteers and staff and the sake of your program, you'll have to take some difficult actions. You can't afford not to. In some of these situations, if the volunteer does not correct the behavior, you may need to fire them. And yes, you can fire volunteers, just like you can fire staff. Difficult situation, but sooner or later, you're going to face it. So set yourself up for success with good descriptions, good environment, good culture in the organization, and you can make it very clear when someone is not meeting their expectations. Okay, redirecting volunteer behavior is that handout that Daphne is going to send you an email along with a copy of the charts, a copy of the slides for today. But it's really a 4-step process for working with volunteers to improve the way they're performing or interacting with others in your organization. As we talked about in the performance side, and works for both sides, of course, have a private discussion and discuss the problem with a volunteer and do that privately. State the problem, state how it affects you, what it does to you, the program, and other volunteers, and then get the volunteers' viewpoint about the challenging behavior. And often the volunteer is not even aware there's a problem. So then determine if there are some external causes, maybe personal life, work environment, misinformation, a triggering incident, a burnout. Those are all possibilities. So get the environment and get the problem defined. Then work on step 2 is some mutual problem solving. So in this step, your goals are to gain an agreement that a problem exists and what needs to be solved, and to get the volunteer's idea about what others can do to help solve the problem and what the volunteer can do to solve the problem. The second part being most important. What can the volunteer do to solve the problem? And then agree on a timeline for taking that action. This time, your goal is to agree on a series of goals. How are we going to get there based on your findings from the previous 2 steps? Be sure the volunteer owns the problem in most cases, and explain how and when you'll follow up. So put a plan in place and put your plan to follow up as part of that in terms of a timeline for corrective action. Step number 4 is the follow-up and recognize achievement. This step of the redirecting challenging behavior process. Your goals this time are follow up as you promised, recognize the achievement to date. Okay, made some progress, recognize that progress. Reinforce the continuing importance of maintaining the improved behavior. In other words, this isn't just a temporary thing. We want this to go forward. Maybe you're not quite there. Maybe you have to adjust the improvement plan. So here's where you do it. And that'll set the stage for an additional follow-up if you need one to get it all cleaned up. So I'll be sending you that handout, and it's something, again, you can use right away if you are working with a problem volunteer, either from a performance standpoint or from a behavior standpoint. Okay, let's move to meaningful recognition. Recognition begins at the beginning, as I like to say. In this case, when we talked about the beginning, have impactful roles for volunteers and document them in clear job descriptions. Identify who will answer questions and provide support, and clearly list the tasks and responsibilities. Recruit and place volunteers carefully based on your organization's needs. Provide the tools, the workspace, material that's needed. Measure results and their impact, and share that. And establish appreciation as part of your culture. So this is setting the groundwork for recognition, and volunteers feel recognized when their needs and requirements are being met in terms of getting the job done. Recognition springs from a culture of appreciation and results in greater productivity. Absolutely. If appreciation is part of your culture, volunteers are integrated into your organization's work, and they are valued and they are celebrated for their impact. Keep in mind, this is how volunteers get paid, right? And if appreciation is part of your culture, your organization builds and acknowledges teams, includes volunteers in meetings, and celebrates together. This means the leadership, the management, the paid staff, volunteers celebrate together successes and anything else that that's going on to bring everyone together. Here is I'm not going to run this poll because we're running a little short on time, but this is a self-assessment you'll have in the copy of the slides. But these are some questions you can ask yourself about your own organization. Do you live in a culture of appreciation? And maybe in areas that you do not, what are you going to do to fix it? Culture of appreciation, very important. Make sure, keeps your volunteers satisfied. Here's what we do with retention, right? Satisfied volunteers stay around. They also recruit their friends, so they become your best ambassadors. So a culture of appreciation, very important. Recognition, why and how? We've heard of many different kinds of recognition. This is a result of a survey that I'm showing on this slide, and what volunteers like. And from the survey results, 80% like hearing how their work made a difference. Close to 70% would like to be thanked in person on an informal basis. Now, the next list that I have in this chart is some ideas that you can implement right now. In terms, handwritten thank you notes are really big in terms of what volunteers like to see, and staff members as well. So a chance for staff to recognize volunteers, a chance to volunteers to recognize staff, right? Participation in different projects, different types of recognition. These are not expensive. They're very common and very easy to do. Some of the larger ones aren't preferred to the level of some of those very simple, inexpensive thank yous that you can provide. Okay. Motivational styles. In our other class called Recognize Your Heroes, we go into this in more detail. But the point I want to make in this chart is volunteers have different preferences from a personality standpoint. Some people are achievement volunteers, some are influence volunteers, and some are affiliation volunteers, and most have some mix. But basically, achievement volunteers are ones that are goal-oriented, like feedback, are trying to do the best they can. They desire excellence. Influence, they want their ideas adopted, like to influence what the organization is doing. Affiliation, like to be well thought of, and use volunteering as a way to build relationships through the work that they're doing. And also they enjoy and they want interaction. So when you're planning a volunteer recognition event, keep in mind you have all three of these in your organization. So if you plan a party, for example, you have the affiliation volunteers pretty well covered, but not so much for the achievement or the influence volunteers. So make sure when you're doing something in terms of recognition and thinking about your recognition plan, look at all three and provide. There's some ideas on the right-hand side of this chart of things you can do for people with the different preferences.
Mike, we do have a quick question in here.
Sure, sure.
So one of our attendees would like to know that if there is an intern coming in, would this apply to an intern as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, be a volunteer, intern, yes. New employee applies as well. Yeah, you want to make people feel comfortable and build them right into your culture. Very important, because also new employees will tend to leave if they don't feel comfortable and able to achieve in your organization. So, leading a successful volunteer organization. 5 things: passion, right? Volunteers focused on a cause are unstoppable. They're your best ambassadors. Focus, what are you doing? Make that clear. Strategy, look at your mission and vision. Where are you going? Team building, again, building team among volunteers builds the relationships and helps them be more effective. Training, people will need training as they go along, as your business changes, as your client base changes. So make sure you're providing the training to your staff and your volunteers that they need going forward. So leading a successful volunteer organization, these are 5 characteristics that'll help you do that. Just in terms of a real quick, I see we're at 2 o'clock, but a quick wrap up. We talked about the importance of volunteer leadership. We talked about engagement and retention. Best practices you can use: situational leadership, management by walking around, communicate, communicate, communicate. The 3 R's, right? Recruitment, recognition, and retention. Well, we talked about recruiting, placing volunteers carefully in your organization, and having appreciation as part of your culture. The references for the presentation today are listed for you. And I thank you for joining us today. Please check out the Triangle Nonprofit and Volunteer Leadership website. It's the volunteercenter.org. We have many different programs. Training is one piece. We have many others. Please take a look and see what's going on at Triangle Nonprofit. We also have the largest volunteer database in the Triangle. It's called Hands on Triangle. It's a way to search for volunteer opportunities and post volunteer needs. And the good news, it's free. So with that, I will say thank you for joining us. And Daphne, thanks for having me today. I'm willing to hang out for questions if anyone has anything else.
Mike, thank you for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you for joining us today, participants. As mentioned previously, we will send today's webinar link, a survey for today's program, materials from today's program, and the registration link for our upcoming programs. The next Lunch and Learn webinar using the 990 for marketing and fundraising is Tuesday, April 12th, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock p.m. Join our presenter, Kim Shaw, Executive Director of Triangle Nonprofit and Volunteer Leadership Center, as we discuss what a 990 is, who uses it, more than a financial reporting tool, and how to describe your programs to attract donors and volunteers. The Lunch and Learn series is held every 1st and 3rd Tuesday at noon. So please be on the lookout for that email from me today, tomorrow at the latest. And I want to say thank you again for joining us.
It looks like we're set.
Yeah, it looks like, let me stop.